Welcome to What the Paper Said, in which I, Patrick Crozier, skim through the Times from 100 years ago, read some of the articles and comment on the ones I find interesting. In this episode, the week ending the 27th of May 1923, Hitler, and Britain gets a new Prime Minister. But first, the headlines. The big story of the week is that Britain has a new Prime Minister. On Monday, the Times reported that Andrew Bonar-Law had resigned. There was no statement from Bonar-Law himself, just one from his doctors saying that they were unable to restore his health. No mention of cancer. Whether they diagnosed him or not, I do not know. Immediately upon his resignation came the job of finding a successor. This was slightly odd because the Times was at pains to claim that the choice of Prime Minister was the King's and the King's alone. Now, constitutionally, this is entirely correct, but practically it is not. It is very much not the King's choice, and not today, certainly, and I don't think it was in 1923 either. Anyway, the choice was between Stanley Baldwin and Lord Curzon, but it emerged very early on that Britain could not have a Prime Minister who sat in the House of Lords. So Curzon was ruled out very early, leaving Baldwin. Now, how exactly this was communicated, how exactly this was decided and then communicated to the King is unclear. Often Conservative leaderships or Conservative Prime Ministers are described as having emerged, and so it would appear with Baldwin. Anyway, he has become Prime Minister. Unemployment is slightly down. There's been a raid in Maida Vale. They found a roulette table and 28 people have been charged. Obviously, gambling of that description was illegal in those days. A boy has died of diphtheria after his mother thought it was a cold, got a herbalist in, and by the time a proper doctor was called in, it was all too late. There's been a report that the cooperative farm movement is not doing very well. This is the day of cooperatives, of workers clubbing together to buy food, and this led to the co-op shops that we see today. Anyway, they tried to expand into farms, and it turned out that farming is harder than they thought. Human remains have been found in a mine. This is quite an operation because the mine had seems to have been disused or flooded, but the police were so sure that they would find remains down there that they sent people down to do so in what was an extremely dangerous operation. The Times has published an Empire number, as they call it. That was on Thursday, a supplement talking about the Empire. The Times has also, on three occasions this week, apologised for having to increase its price from 1.5 pence to 2 pence, which is odd because Britain at the moment is experiencing deflation, so prices are coming down. The Lord Mayor of London was knocked down by a bus, and the first Fu Manchu movie is being screened in the cinemas. In benighted foreign parts, there have been communist disorders in the Ruhr. Policemen have been killed in this, with the result that the communists are now in control of Gelsenkirchen. Now, you may think, what exactly are the French occupying forces doing? Well, turns out they've been doing almost nothing. And in New York, the famous restaurant, famous to others, not to me, Delmonico's, has closed, apparently due to prohibition. A couple of weeks ago, I alluded to the Irish Boundary Commission. This is the body which has been set up or will be set up to determine the boundary between the United Kingdom and the Irish Free State. The topic came up in a letter to the Times from a William O'Brien. I'd never heard of this guy, but it turns out he was a prominent Irish nationalist. The claim he made was that during the negotiations that led to the Anglo-Irish Treaty of 1921, 1922, I'll guess 1922, a promise had been made by a couple of British government ministers that Londonderry, Fermanagh and Tyrone and Newry would be transferred to the Irish Free State. As it turned out, none of those areas were ever transferred, although there are plenty of unionists who wouldn't mind if quite a lot of Londonderry disappeared, and ditto Newry, as well as South Armagh, which is not mentioned here. As far as Fermanagh and Tyrone goes, spoiler alert, I can't remember whether it's the 1923 election or the 1924 election, but Fermanagh and Tyrone is a parliamentary constituency. And in one of those elections, I think it's 24, for the one and only time a unionist managed to win the seat. The implication is that a lot of people who would normally vote for Irish nationalist candidates, confronted with the possibility of being ruled from Dublin, decided that actually they would rather not, and so voted unionist or stayed at home. This is one of the oddities of Ulster politics, is that whereas a lot of people will vote for Irish nationalist parties, and this is to this day, when you see polls conducted of how many people actually want to join with the Republic of Ireland as it is nowadays, there are very few. Why that is, I am not quite sure. It seems odd, but that's the way things are. The term public school has long generated confusion here and abroad. Just how long is illustrated by this quotation from a letter published on Saturday the 26th by an anonymous correspondent. Finally, I would like to say that the term public school, until it is used in its true and wider sense, is merely ridiculous. The French car maker André Citroën has returned from a trip to the United States brimming with statistics. The United States produces 85% of the world's cars. The cheapest cars cost $300, which is about £60, which is about 12 ounces of gold. Make your own conversion. Cars typically last for 4 years. 1 in 8 of the American population has a car. This compares to 1 in 90 in the UK and 1 in 130 in France. And finally, there are 13 million cars in the United States. Citroën himself has recently demonstrated a Caterpillar car, or what we would nowadays call a half-track. The president of Columbia University has been visiting Britain and has been giving a series of lectures at Cambridge University. On Saturday the 26th, the Times reported on his lecture on George Washington, in which he said this: "When he died on December the 14th, 1799, he was hailed in Great Britain and France as a great world figure, and mourned there with every mark of official and private distinction and grief. The proud fleet of Great Britain carried its flags at half-mast." I must confess I am amazed by that. The war was well within living memory. It only finished, 16 years beforehand. And I don't think Britain had, at that stage, quite got over it. Anyway, that's how they marked it. Butler himself is an interesting character. He was a vice presidential candidate in 1912, obviously unsuccessful. He had restricted entry to Columbia University to Jewish students in the 1910s. Ivy League universities restricting access on the basis of racial characteristics. Couldn't happen today. He will win a Nobel Prize, and he will have, how should you put it, equivocal views on the rise of the fascists and Nazis. One man whose death did not lead to Union Jacks being flown at half-mast was Adolf Hitler. On Tuesday the 22nd, the Times published an article dedicated to Hitler and his movement. It's a bit long, but I think it's worth reading out in full. The Bavarian Nationalist Socialist Workers' Party, Adolf Hitler's so-called Bavarian Fascisti, Yeah, so called by whom, I wonder? They don't call themselves fascisti, so who does? Anyway, he goes on. Adolf Hitler's so-called Bavarian Fascisti continue to hold frequent rallies in Munich, and a stranger arriving in the city on a Hitler field day might well imagine that the town was occupied by a foreign power. On these occasions, bands of stormtroops march about in strictly military formation. They wear grey uniforms somewhat after the Italian pattern, carry fascist standards, usually red with a black swastika emblazoned in the centre, and parade the streets without opposition from the authorities. Many of these stormtroops are lads of from 17 to 20, but professional and businessmen, ex-officers, students and farmers can be seen in the ranks. Recently, Hitler's men have been equipped with steel helmets of the regulation government pattern, presumably surplus war material that was supposed to have been destroyed long ago, which makes you wonder what else should have been destroyed long ago. This semi-military organisation is not only tolerated, but indirectly supported by the government, ostensibly on the ground that its formations could be used to suppress any communist rising. Your occasional reminder that people were absolutely terrified of communism in this period. Legislation has been enacted by the Bavarian Diet forbidding any members to carry knuckle dusters or similar weapons. But in spite of this, every active member of the Hitler organisation carries a flexible steel truncheon covered with rubber and probably an automatic revolver of a pattern largely manufactured throughout Germany. I love the term automatic revolver. You can have an automatic or a revolver, but not both. Well, in my book anyway. Recently, manoeuvres on a large scale took place in the area between Munich and Starnberg. Operations were obviously carried out in accordance with a pre-arranged tactical scheme. About 5,000 men took part, drawn not only from the Hitler Party, but also from the United Fatherland Associations and from Erhardt's Naval Brigade, which still flourishes, although officially it was suppressed 2 years ago. This organisation was involved in the Kapp Putsch of 1920. The reactionary press announced that the proceedings had been of a purely social and sporting character. Even allowing for the somewhat quaint ideas that still prevailed as to correct sporting attire, it is difficult to believe that steel helmets, tight-fitting military uniforms and machine gun slings are necessary for a day's sport in Bavaria. Adolf Hitler himself has been described recently as one of the 3 most dangerous men in Germany. This is probably rather a flattering estimate, no it isn't, of the little Austrian sign painter, who less than 3 years ago was earning a precarious living by charging a small admission fee for the meetings he addressed in obscure beer halls. Nevertheless, the Hitler Party today has to be reckoned with as one of the most important factors in the political situation in Bavaria. In December last, the total number of subscribing members was estimated at 20,000, and since then many recruits have been enrolled. The number of men wearing swastika badges to be seen during a walk through the streets of Munich is amazing. The party organ, the Völkischer Beobachter, is sold in most cafes and restaurants every evening by youths in full fascist uniform. It seems to have a considerable circulation. Hitler's rise to prominence is mainly due to his gift of oratory. It has yet to be proved that he has any ability as a constructive statesman. I'll leave it to the listener to decide what constitutes a constructive statesman, and if anyone they've ever heard of fulfills that definition. Anyway, we go on. Short and stockily built, he barks out abuse against the Republican Constitution, foreigners, Jews, profiteers, and incompetent politicians, rather in the manner of a Prussian drill sergeant on parade. He invariably carries his audience with him. Was he short? I did look this up, and because I was told many, many years ago that he wasn't short at all, he just surrounded himself with tall people. But there are plenty of people who say, well, actually, no, he was short. Seeing as that's what he looked like, I'll go with that. I'm not sure he was stockily built, though. Anyway, he goes on. At the headquarters of the organisation near the Gärtnerplatz Theatre, the visitor is confronted in the main hall by the notice Sturmabteilung, Stormtroop Section. Newspaper correspondence, while courteously received, are not very welcome. Frequently they are told if they wish to hear the views of the fascist leader, they may do so by attending one of his meetings. A former German staff officer who is in close touch with Hitler recently intimated to a British correspondent that for a subscription of £5 sterling an interview could be arranged. But without subscribing nearly 500,000 marks to the party funds, it is possible to obtain an accurate impression of the political aims of the Bavarian fascist movement from the 25 Articles of Faith to which all members must subscribe. The leaders of the party are bound by a solemn oath to give their lives, if necessary, to accomplish the aims set out in these Articles of Faith. Several of the articles deal with objects that are common to all social reformers. I'd love to know what they are, but it doesn't say. The remainder may be summarised as follows. The repeal of the Treaty of Versailles. Colonies to support national commerce and absorb the surplus population. That's Lebensraum, isn't it? All foreigners who have taken up their residence in Germany since August 2nd, 1914, to be expelled. Now, what's that all about? I mean, you wouldn't have thought that a war-ravaged nation like Germany was exactly an attractive destination for migration. Anyway, it goes on. The abolition of unearned incomes, communism. Requisition by the state of all profits earned during the war, communism. The voluntary army to be disbanded and conscription reintroduced. No individual of the Jewish faith to be allowed the rights of German citizenship. Well, they're not exactly hiding it, are they? Religious freedom insofar as it does not morally affect the welfare of the state. Nationalisation of the country's key industries. Communism. The abolition of the present party system of government. In other words, the abolition of democracy. Capital punishment for traitors, usurers and profiteers regardless of race or religion. Well, if he thinks an economy can be run without money lending, well, he's off his rocker. Well, we knew that. Recently, Herr Hitler's party and the United Fatherland Association have come to a working agreement in regard to the training and organisation of their respective stormtroops. Although the two organisations may have difference of opinion as to details of policy, they are in complete accord on two essential points: armed resistance to the conditions of the Treaty of Versailles and the restoration of the military party to power. I guess they mean Prussian militarism as it was known, which I'm not sure anyone's really properly defined, but it's one of those things you know it when you see it. It goes on. The United Fatherland Association, which may be said to comprise every shade of reaction and militarism in Bavaria, came into being largely through a suggestion made by Field Marshal Hindenburg during his visit to Munich in August 1922. Yeah, Hindenburg, I think, gets away with it historically. He tends to be seen as a avuncular neutral. It would appear that he was nothing of the sort. The constitution and rules of the association were drawn up at a meeting held at the house of the former president, Herr von Kahr. I assume they mean former president of Bavaria. Yeah, Herr von Kahr will have his role to play really soon, as we shall see. In addition to Marshal Hindenburg and von Kahr, there were present at this meeting ex-Crown Prince Prince Ruprecht, that's ex-Crown Prince of Bavaria, General Ludendorff, General von Bottmer, I don't know who this guy is, the former chief of the Munich police, the notorious Perner, he ran death squads, and the chief leaders of the reactionary movement in Bavaria. Approximately 18 military and veteran organisations were linked together in the Fatherland Association. General Ludendorff is a leading member. The ex-Crown Prince Ruprecht attends all meetings and is invariably addressed as Your Majesty, and treated with the honours usually accorded to a reigning monarch. Not by Hitler, I shouldn't think. Hitler was very much a Republican, didn't want these guys coming back. It goes on. Probably 80% of the demobilised commissioned and non-commissioned forces of the Bavarian army are members, and by a very thorough card index system the military history, physical condition and capabilities of each individual are recorded.
There is little doubt that these records are in the possession of the responsible military authorities of Bavaria. I'm not quite sure what they mean here. Does he mean that the responsible military authorities of Bavaria, which I guess he means the Reichswehr, the German army, is spying on the United Fatherland Association? Or does he mean that if they're basically colluding with one another? Anyway, it goes on. That Herr Hitler is strong enough to dominate not only his own party, but the United Fatherland Association, and to supersede leaders such as ex-Crown Prince Ruprecht or General Ludendorff in the event of a nationalist putsch appears extremely doubtful. Oh, does it? By many he is regarded as a useful tool to be discarded in case of success and disowned in the event of failure. Yeah, that won't age well. Anyway, that's all for this week. I aim to have something up next week, but I promise nothing.